I'm Caroline Fredrickson. I'm the Executive Director of the American Constitution Society for Law and Policy. For those of you who may not be familiar with ACS, we are an organization that believes that law should be a force to improve the lives of all people. ACS works to shape debate on vitally important legal and constitutional issues through the development and promotion of important ideas to opinion leaders in the media and by building a network of lawyers, law students, judges, and policymakers across the country. We are very pleased to join the Center for American Progress in convening today's discussion on the crisis in legal services. We have a number of experts here today: Alan Hausman, Jean Charn, Joy Moses, and ACS board member Peter Edelman, to discuss this topic and the white papers that they have written that frame the discussion today. In these papers, they asked a very important question: how do we improve quality and access to legal services for low-income Americans? We at ACS are committed to answering this question. Access to justice, particularly for indigent populations, is a priority for our organization. Last year at the ACS convention, we had a presentation on this topic that featured Peter Edelman and other experts, and we have published a series of issue briefs that can be found on our website addressing how to improve the indigent defense system. And at last week's ACS convention, the Attorney General, Eric Holder, asked ACS for our continued partnership in, quote, expanding access to legal services. For CAP, this is also a priority. Today's program is only part of its Doing What Works project to advance government reform. The white papers CAP commissioned make the case for continued and increased resources for legal services. And the legal services system, it's no exaggeration to say that it is indeed, sadly, in crisis. More than 80% of low-income Americans have no access to civil legal assistance. Sadly, as we all know, this crisis has been made only worse by the unemployment rate in this country and the foreclosure problem. And at $284 per hour, which is the national average billing rate for attorneys, it is no surprise that many are priced out of access to justice. But though we are not surprised, we must be concerned about this situation. The cost of unmet legal needs is great, but it's not just for those who cannot seek access to the court, but it's for all of us and for our society, where we claim that our motto is justice for all. How do we live up to the principle of justice for all in the context of civil legal assistance? As our esteemed experts today have done in their white papers, today's discussion will address various questions, including: what is the status of the Legal Services Corporation and funding for civil legal services? How do we advance evidence-based legal aid delivery systems? And how do we equip pro se litigants with the tools and resources that they need? We're going to explore these questions and many others with the help of a very distinguished moderator, Michelle Martin. I'm sure Michelle is well known to all of you. She is an Emmy Award winner and the host of a wonderful show, Tell Me More. It's NPR's daily one-hour news and talk show. More than 25 years in both print and broadcast with news outlets that include ABC, The Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal, Michelle is incredibly well equipped to lead a dynamic discussion today. So I would like you to join me in welcoming Michelle and our panelists. Thank you.
I can probably do it better off here.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for giving up your lunch hour, unless you've got some NutriFast hidden under there. And if you do, more power to you. As Caroline said, thank you, Caroline. Distinguished makes me feel old. I prefer, talented and beautiful, but I'll take whatever. I hope this will be a conversation and not a monologue. That goes for all of us up here. I thought that we would talk among ourselves for however long it feels comfortable, and then we'd like to open the conversation up to the room. I'm going to ask that we save 10 minutes at the end so that each of our distinguished panelists, they are really distinguished. I'm just playing one. So each of our panelists can give a closing thought, something that you can sort of take away with you. And then I think Donna is going to send us off on our way. So with that being said, I'll start by saying I'm sorry in advance, because I know I'm not going to get to everyone in the room, because apparently everybody here has some stake in the issue, has some knowledge base about the issue. So let me start by saying in advance, I'm sorry, we're probably not going to get to everybody in the room, but we will try. And you will, I hope, forgive me when I do cut the questions off at the end to give everybody a chance to give us something to walk away with, which presumably is why you're here. And this is a terrific panel, and I'm really interested to hear what they have to say about this issue, which is one of those issues that strikes me, it's hiding in plain sight. It's something that if you think about it, it's intuitively obvious that this is something that would be a problem. But then the question is, once you've made that recognition, what do you do about it? So to talk about this, we're really excited to be joined by Ellen Hausman, Executive Director of the Center for Law and Social Policy. Thank you for coming. I'm told that you're the father of legal services. Do you take that
No, that's
moniker?
a slight exaggeration.
Grandfather, cousin, brother-in-law, the brother-in-law of legal services.
Maybe brother-in-law.
Okay, brother-in-law. Joy Moses is Senior Policy Analyst of the Center for American Progress. Thank you so much for coming. Jean Sharn is the Director of the Bellow Sachs Access to Civil Legal Services Project at Harvard Law School. Thank you so much for coming. Peter Edelman, Professor at Georgetown University Law Center, and certainly, as I think all know, a force of moral authority and integrity that so many of us consult with on those pressing questions that so few really want to talk about. So thank you all so much for coming. And I'm going to start with a question that, my old executive producer at Nightline, when we'd come back from a field assignment looking bedraggled, he would start with this question: is anything okay? So Joy, I'm going to start with you. Is anything okay when it comes to providing services to people who really need them?
Certainly. I think I'm probably one of the more junior people on the panel, and I'm honored to be with this distinguished group of people. But I would say one of the positive things is that we have so many committed people who are committed to justice and access to justice and legal services, and especially still among the newer people joining the field, such as myself. And I think that excitement and that energy will carry us through this period where we try to figure out some new ways to actually better provide services. Certainly, there are some challenges ahead in funding legal services and making sure that more people have access to attorneys, and in transforming our court system in a way that's more friendly to pro se.
Well, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. But I want to hear from the other members of the panel. Professor Sharn, is anything okay?
Yeah, I think there are some things going on that are actually very encouraging, not just in the legal services and subsidized world, but in the private bar. One of the things we don't talk about a lot that's very important are the great legal needs of working class and middle income people. Our system is largely addressed to the subsidized system to meet the poor. And so they're not at the center maybe, but towards the outside of the private bar, the solo and small firm bar, they're working hard on ways of reaching that working middle class population. There's a notion that there's a latent market out there, and if we can reach them with things that are important. And similarly, inside the subsidized sector, there's a lot of innovation going on in how we deliver services and make it very consumer driven and make it work. Make it work. Get the problem solved in ways that people feel satisfied with, that they were heard, that there was a place for them in this system. So there are examples, good examples,
Okay.
not scale.
We'll pick up on that. Professor Edelman, is anything okay?
I think two things are okay, Michelle. One is, and we'll talk about the gaps and the needs for sure, but there's actually been a pretty steady increase for the last few years in the amount of money that we're spending on the full-time lawyers, and of course the pro bono lawyers are added to that. So Alan's paper that is in this publication today points out that we have $1.5 billion, including the federal money, which is a little less than a third of that. And so big needs, but that's actually going in the right direction. And the other thing that's great is the lawyers. I mean, there's huge poverty that we also need to talk about, but you go anywhere in this country or to any meeting of legal services lawyers and providers, and there's a sense of enthusiasm and commitment to making this a better world, and a lot of them are young and really the next generation whom we have to count on if we're going to get anywhere in the right direction in this country.
Alan Housman?
I would say first, I agree with Peter, by the way, on everything he said.
I'm on his board.
Yeah, well, I better agree with him. And he's my mentor, among other things. But I would say two things now at this stage. One, I think the basic delivery system that we've tried to put in place in this country, it needs some tweaking, it needs some changes, but it's basically an effective system that reaches and really tries to address the most pressing legal problems in low-income communities across the country. And I think it's served well doing that. There's financial issues and a range of issues that we need to look at, but I think the basic delivery system is sound. It needs improvement, it needs constant improvement, but it's basically sound. Secondly, I would say that we have made, over the last 15 years, substantial progress in improving access to the courts. I think through a variety of means, and I think that's very important. And we've got a long ways to go, don't misunderstand me, but I think we've made substantial progress in that. So I think that's okay. On the other hand, I'll end by just saying, I think there is, in my view, too much emphasis on access and not enough emphasis on justice. So from my point of view, I don't mean to be totally rhetorical here, but from my point of view, a civil legal aid system should provide access, and the system, self-help, pro se, all of the technology developments that we have, which are very important. We need to increase access, but we also need to have in place a system that provides justice, equal justice for low-income people. So I think we've got a ways to go there.
I'm interested to hear about how you frame that question for people who don't ever think they'll be in that situation. I guess it's really the why do I care question for people who never see, there's lawyer jokes, a lot of you are lawyers, so the lawyer
Right.
jokes abound, and my answer to, well, my husband's a lawyer, I think that's, but my husband said that everybody hates lawyers until they need one. So the question is, how do you frame this question for people who feel like, I'm never going to be poor, I'm never going to be evicted from a house, I'm never going to be foreclosed upon. I mean, maybe that's an easier argument now because so many people are experiencing this who perhaps never thought they would be. But one of the things that's sort of interesting to me is I'm still wondering whether this is an in-group conversation. Is there a broad, do you think, belief in this society that this is something that people should have?
Yeah.
Like, for example, in this country, we believe that everybody should have access to education, for example.
Well, I think there's
What do you think?
I think there's a belief in this country that everybody should have access to justice. I think people think more of it's available than it is. And you see that in survey after survey where people think there's a right to counsel in civil cases where there isn't. And and you see it, we did some, it's about 10 years ago, maybe a little less, maybe 8 years ago. We did a set of focus groups. We paid big money to do a set of focus groups, and it was very interesting in those groups that and these were middle class, these were a range of people, they weren't poor people, this was a regular focus group kind of thing. And everybody was very supportive of access to civil legal aid, and they thought it was already there, and they were very surprised to find out it wasn't. So I think there's a base that you begin with. It's certainly a strong base in the bar, but I think it goes beyond that. I don't want to oversell that, I want to overstate that, but I do think there is a view in the society that there should be access to justice, and that civil and as well as into criminal defense.
Joe, the word crisis has been used several times here, and I wanted to ask if I could get you to pin down on where and I'll ask each of you this question, where you think the crisis lies, and everywhere is not the answer we're looking for, because I really want to kind of pin down on where you really think the crisis points are. And I also want to ask, do you think, like with diagnosing an illness, often we ask the question, is it that it really is more prevalent, or we're just better at seeing it?
Yeah, I would say that even though we've had some great increases in funding for legal services over the last a couple years, and that's changed recently, that we still know that we're turning a lot of people away who need help from legal services. The Legal Services Corporation regularly publishes this information, and it indicates that they're turning tons of cases away each year. So we know that there are people who need help that aren't getting it.
But where are people least likely to be served? Like, for example, California has a law, I don't know how they're able to fund this given their financial problems, that there are sort of 5 key areas, child custody, foreclosure, life and death, issues in the civil, life-changing, for example. Is there one area or 2 or 3 in that realm that you would identify and say, this is really where the crisis is?
Well, the biggest area of unmet need is in family law, and that's largely due to changes in society, the increases in the amount of divorce, increases in the number of people who have children out of wedlock, and the complications that brings about. And our system was never, I don't think, ever really adjusted and was prepared to handle those societal changes, and we're still struggling with how do we deal with it, how are we going to make sure that all the people that need help with these questions get it. And I think we're in the process of trying to figure that out.
Professor Schoen, what do you think?
Well, the crisis, the first comment you made is an interesting one, which is, I don't think this is an issue that's on a broadly popular issue. It's not something the public is asking candidates about for the most part. When people, and so the tendency for people who don't have a lawyer that they regularly consult with, which tends to be much wealthier people, not the middle class either, something bad has to happen before you get to a lawyer. So I would say actually one of the crises in the legal system that we now have is that we don't have ways of reaching people before the problems have accumulated so that they are a crisis. And now it's expensive and difficult to solve. So I think that the whole consumer area is an area where people need more legal information. I certainly have the experience as a middle class person that sometimes those folks are out to make money off me, and they're not selling me something I want or need. Well, we just saw the whole mortgage crisis of people being sold products they didn't understand. And when they're being foreclosed on, when they're being evicted from a house that